If this moment had not been captured on film, people would have called it exaggeration, mythology, or hero worship, because sometimes reality moves so fast that memory refuses to accept it. It was not a tournament. It was not a championship. There were no posters, no ticket sales, no announcers shouting into microphones. Just a warehouse in San Francisco in the winter of 1971, a room lit by hanging bulbs that hummed softly above a concrete floor still cold from the night air, and about 12 men standing in a loose circle, pretending not to feel the tension that had already filled the space before the door even opened. They were fighters, real fighters. Boxers, karate instructors, a wrestler, 2 former Marines, and 1 man who had flown in from Los Angeles because he had heard rumors. Rumors that sounded impossible. Rumors about a man who could close distance before your brain registered danger. Rumors about a strike you never saw coming. Rumors about Bruce Lee. But here is what people misunderstand. The unbelievable moment did not begin with speed. It began with silence. Bruce did not enter dramatically. He walked in like someone who had already been there. Black pants, simple shoes, no jacket, no entourage, no arrogance. But the room changed temperature when he stepped inside. One of the Marines whispered under his breath, "He's smaller than I expected." That sentence would age badly within the next 5 minutes. Bruce looked around the room, not scanning for threats, not measuring opponents but observing posture, breathing, tension in shoulders, weight distribution in feet, the tiny tells most fighters hide without knowing they are hiding them. He wasn't looking at muscles. He was looking at decisions. And that is where the story shifts. Because in the corner of the warehouse stood a heavy wooden table, and leaning against it was a man built like a wall. 6'4", 230 pounds. Former Golden Gloves boxer. Hands like concrete. He did not bow. He did not smile. He stepped forward. "You're the fast guy," he said. Bruce tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "I move when it is time," he replied calmly. The circle tightened. Someone pulled out a small handheld film camera. Not because they expected history. Because they expected humiliation. They thought this would finally expose the myth. The big boxer rolled his shoulders once and cracked his neck. "No rules?" he asked. Bruce nodded. "No rules." And suddenly the air felt heavy. The boxer raised his fist. Classic stance. Weight slightly forward. Bruce did something strange. He lowered his hands. Not fully, but enough to look careless. That was the second shift. The boxer lunged first. A fast jab. Sharp. Direct. It should have landed. Everyone saw it coming. Except they didn't see what happened next. Bruce did not step back. He stepped inside the punch. Inside. Before the jab extended fully, Bruce's front foot slid forward in a barely visible glide, his torso rotating not to block but to disappear from the punch's line, and his right hand snapped out, not to the face, but to the bicep, a sharp, precise interruption that froze the larger man's arm mid-extension. The punch died halfway. The boxer's eyes widened. And in that microscopic hesitation, less than half a second, Bruce's left hand struck. Not hard. Not dramatic. Just a vertical fist to the sternum. But the sound it made was not what anyone expected. It wasn't a slap. It wasn't a thud. It was a compressed impact that seemed to push air out of the entire room. The boxer staggered back 2 steps. Not from pain. From confusion. How he started. Bruce didn't let him finish. Because here comes the third shift. Instead of pressing forward wildly, Bruce paused. He let the moment breathe. And that pause was more terrifying than speed. The boxer attacked again, this time angrier, throwing a combination left hook, right cross, body shot. Bruce moved through them like smoke. Not retreating. Not blocking in traditional form. He intercepted. Every strike meant something before it reached full power. A forearm redirecting a hook. A palm jamming the shoulder before the cross extended. A knee lifting slightly to cut off the body shot. It looked less like fighting and more like dismantling. And then it happened. The unbelievable moment. The boxer threw one final desperate overhand right. A full commitment. Everything behind it. And Bruce did something no one expected. He stopped it. Not by grabbing the wrist. Not by stepping away. He struck the punching arm at the exact instant it accelerated past peak tension. A short snapping hit just above the elbow. There was a sharp crack. The punch collapsed midair. The boxer dropped to one knee, not screaming, not dramatic, but stunned, clutching his arm as if his own momentum had betrayed him. Silence. Real silence. The kind where people stop breathing. Bruce stepped back immediately. Not celebrating. Not posing. He looked concerned. "Do not lock your joints when angry," he said softly. The camera kept rolling. But the men holding it no longer smirked. They stared. Because what they had just witnessed was not strength defeating strength. It was timing defeating certainty. The boxer stood slowly. Arm shaking. He looked at Bruce differently now. Not as a smaller opponent, but as something unpredictable. Again, the boxer said. Bruce nodded. But this time he changed the distance. He invited him closer. And that's where the fourth shift begins. Instead of waiting for attack, Bruce advanced first. Fast, but not wild. A low side kick shot forward like a piston into the thigh. The boxer's leg buckled slightly. Before balance returned, a straight lead hand snapped toward the nose, pulling back before full extension. A feint. The real strike came from below. A quick kick to the midsection that forced air out violently. The larger man swung wildly again. Bruce pivoted, and in one seamless motion, he stepped behind him. Behind him. The room gasped, because repositioning like that in open space should not be that easy. Bruce tapped the back of his shoulder. "If this were real," he whispered. The boxer didn't argue. He didn't need to. He turned slowly, respect replacing ego in real time. And here is where the emotional layer deepens. Bruce didn't smile. He looked tired, not physically, but philosophically. He walked toward the small group watching and said something that none of them forgot. "You are all strong." He pointed toward his temple. "But you fight here too late." One of the Marines stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Bruce took a breath. "You decide after you see." He tapped his chest lightly. "I decide before you move." That line hung in the air like a challenge. Because it wasn't about speed. It was about awareness. And that's when the final shift of this chapter begins. From the back of the warehouse, a voice spoke. Calm, measured. You cannot decide before randomness. Everyone turned. An older man stood there. Gray suit. Thin frame. Hands behind his back. He had been watching silently. He stepped forward. "I have studied unpredictability for 20 years, he said. Chaos does not allow predecision. Bruce's eyes sharpened slightly. Chaos, he replied, is only chaos to those who need structure. The room had changed again. This was no longer about fighting. It was about philosophy. The older man walked closer. If I attack without pattern, without emotion, without rhythm, what then? Bruce smiled faintly. Then you are already predictable. Silence. The older man nodded slowly. Show me. And just like that, the stakes changed. Because this man did not move like a boxer. He did not telegraph tension. He moved erratically. Sudden shifts. Fake lunges. Random angles. No rhythm. The circle widened. Bruce did not rush. He observed. The older man darted in suddenly with a palm strike. Bruce barely shifted. Intercepted. But the second attack came from an unexpected angle. Bruce absorbed it partially. A glancing hit to the ribs. The room reacted. It was small, but it was contact. And that is important. Because perfection is boring. Human reaction builds tension. Bruce stepped back slightly. Breathing slower now. Adjusting. The older man smiled. Random, he whispered. Bruce nodded once. Yes. And then, he stopped watching the hands. He watched the feet. Every so-called random movement began from weight shift. From balance. From micro-commitment in the hips. Bruce's eyes dropped lower. And everything changed. When the next sudden attack came, Bruce was already inside it. He didn't react. He arrived. A clean straight lead stopped inches from the older man's throat. Not touching, but undeniable. The older man froze, breathing heavier now. Bruce lowered his hand gently. There is always a pattern, he said quietly. You just have to look deeper. The film camera kept recording. No one spoke, because now they understood. It was never about being faster. It was about seeing sooner. And if this moment had not been filmed, no one would believe how calm he was when the room realized he was operating one layer ahead of everyone else. But the story doesn't end there. Because later that night, after most had left, after the warehouse lights dimmed and the concrete floor felt colder, one young student remained. He approached Bruce cautiously. How do I become that fast? He asked. Bruce shook his head. Speed is not what you saw. The student frowned. But you moved so quickly. Bruce smiled faintly. I removed hesitation. And that answer is where part 2 begins. The warehouse was almost empty now. The concrete still held the echo of movement, but the air had shifted from confrontation to quiet reflection, and in that quiet, the myth of Bruce Lee felt less like legend and more like something human, something breathing, something that could still make mistakes. The young student remained near the edge of the room, unsure whether to leave or stay, because witnessing skill like that creates two reactions inside a person: inspiration and insecurity. Bruce sat on the edge of the wooden table. No dramatic pose. No cinematic stare into the distance. He was massaging his right forearm. And that small detail mattered, because even precision costs something. The student noticed. "You're hurt?" he asked softly. Bruce shook his head. "Not hurt," he replied. "Reminded." That word lingered. Reminded of what? The student stepped closer. "You said you removed hesitation," he continued. "How?" Bruce looked down at his own hands for a moment, almost as if examining tools that did not always obey him. "You think hesitation begins in the muscles," he said quietly. "It doesn't." He tapped his chest again. "It begins when you care too much about the outcome." That sentence shifted the tone. Because earlier that night, Bruce had looked untouchable. Now he looked reflective. Human? The student frowned slightly. "But if you don't care about the outcome, don't you lose?" Bruce smiled faintly. "No," he said, "you lose when you fear losing." Silence again. And here is where the suspense pivots. Because what most people never saw about Bruce Lee was the war inside him. The camera had captured dominance. It had not captured doubt. Earlier that week, before this warehouse meeting was even arranged, Bruce had woken up at 3:17 a.m. in his small apartment, heart racing, not from physical pain, but from something heavier. Expectation. Rumors were spreading. Stories exaggerating his speed. People calling him invincible. And nothing creates pressure like invincibility. Because once people believe you cannot fail, failure becomes catastrophic. He had stood in front of the mirror that night. Not flexing. Not shadowboxing. Just staring. What if they are right, he had whispered to himself. Not about his greatness. About the myth. What if he couldn't live up to it? And that fear is what almost ruined him. Back in the warehouse, the student didn't know any of this. He only saw a man who moved like lightning. But lightning is not born from confidence. It's born from tension in the sky. Bruce stood up slowly and walked to the center of the floor again. "Attack me," he told the student. The boy hesitated immediately. "I can't," he said. "There," Bruce replied instantly. "That is hesitation." The student swallowed hard. "But you'll counter." Bruce nodded. "Probably." The boy lunged awkwardly. Slow. Predictable. Bruce moved gently this time, redirecting instead of striking. Again. Attack. This time slightly faster. Bruce stepped aside again. After 5 attempts, the student was breathing heavily. Frustrated. "See," the boy said, "you always know." Bruce's expression changed. And this is where tension rises again. "No," he said quietly. "I don't." The student blinked. Bruce stepped closer. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I guess wrong." That sentence matters. Because perfection breaks relatability. And now the emotional pivot deepens. There was a fight, Bruce continued slowly. Not recorded, not public, where I was late. The student leaned forward. Late? Yes, Bruce said. He did not move like anyone I had faced. He hesitated differently, and for 1 second I read him incorrectly. Bruce placed 2 fingers lightly against his ribs. He hit me here. Not hard, but clean. And in that moment, Bruce continued, voice softer now, I felt anger rise. Anger at himself. Anger at being touched. Anger at imperfection. And that anger, he said, almost made me slow. The student looked confused. Anger makes you faster. Bruce shook his head. Anger makes you narrow. Another silence. This one heavier. Speed, Bruce said carefully, is wide awareness. Anger shrinks vision. And suddenly, the earlier warehouse moment made more sense. Bruce had not been emotionless. He had been expansive. The suspense shifts again. Because while they were talking, footsteps echoed near the door. Not many. Just 2. Bruce's head tilted slightly. He had heard them before the student did. The door slid open. The older man in the gray suit returned. But he was not alone this time. Behind him stood someone younger. Tall, lean, sharp eyes. No introduction. The air tightened again. We would like another exchange, the older man said calmly. The student stepped back instinctively. Bruce did not move. Now Bruce asked. Yes. No audience. No circle. No witnesses except the student. The tall young man stepped forward. His posture was different. Not aggressive. Not relaxed. Coiled. Bruce felt something shift inside himself. Not fear. Recognition. This one was dangerous. Not because of size. Because of patience. And that changes everything. They faced each other without bowing. No wasted motion. The young man moved first. But unlike the others, he did not commit fully. He probed. Small hand feints. Low kicks that stopped halfway. Bruce did not counter immediately. He waited. And that waiting built tension. Seconds stretched longer than they should. The student could barely breathe. Then it happened. The young man exploded forward. Not with a punch. With a shoulder check designed to break rhythm and balance. Bruce absorbed it partially. A real impact. A stumble. Just 1 step back. But real. And the student's heart jumped. Because this time Bruce had not disappeared. He had been touched again. The young man followed with a rapid low kick. Bruce checked it but slightly late. Contact. Another small one. Tiny. But enough. The room changed temperature again. Bruce's eyes sharpened. He adjusted distance. But the young man did something unusual. He stopped attacking. He stood still. Watching. Waiting. Reversing the psychological pressure. And that is the most dangerous shift of all. Because now Bruce had to initiate. He stepped forward cautiously. The young man reacted instantly with a spinning back fist. Fast. Unexpected. Bruce ducked but felt wind against his temple. Close. Very close. For the first time that night, Bruce smiled. Not out of superiority. Out of respect. Now this was real. He advanced again, but this time he didn't aim to intercept the strike. He aimed to disrupt the mind. A sharp stomp toward the foot, not to injure but to provoke reaction. The young man flinched. And in that microsecond, Bruce entered. Not with power. With pressure. Forearm against collarbone. Weight shift into center line. Control. But the young man resisted hard. They locked briefly. Muscle against muscle. No elegance. Just raw resistance. And here is the critical suspense moment. For half a second, Bruce could not move him. Strength met strength. And the outcome hung in uncertainty. Then Bruce did something unexpected. He relaxed. Not fully, but enough to remove tension from his own body. The sudden absence of resistance caused the young man to overcommit forward. And Bruce pivoted. Redirected. Guided him past center. A soft sweep. The young man hit the ground, not violently, but decisively. Silence again. Bruce stepped back immediately. Breathing slightly heavier now. Not invincible, not untouched, but present. The older man in gray nodded slowly. You adapt quickly, he said. Bruce shook his head gently. No, he replied. I let go quickly. That line hit differently, because adaptation requires ego to step aside. The young man stood up slowly. He bowed this time. Deeper. Not out of defeat. Out of recognition. Bruce returned the bow. After they left, the student looked at Bruce with new eyes. You almost lost, he whispered. Bruce laughed softly. There is no almost. Another shift. You either see or you learn. The student swallowed. So what should I train? Bruce looked toward the door where the night air slipped in. Train your awareness when tired. Train your calm when pressured. Train your ego to be smaller than your curiosity. The student nodded slowly. But Bruce wasn't finished. And most importantly, he paused. Train your recovery from mistakes. Because that is what makes the unbelievable moment believable. Not speed, not dominance, but the ability to correct faster than others can capitalize. And as the warehouse lights flickered off one by one, the camera resting on the table still quietly humming from the tape inside. Bruce picked it up. He looked at it. Long, thoughtful, because he understood something the others didn't yet. If this footage ever surfaced, people would not see the small hits. They would not see the near-miss spinning strike. They would not see the moment of physical stalemate. They would only see dominance. And that misunderstanding would create the myth. But myth is dangerous, because myth removes humanity. And humanity is where growth lives. He turned the camera off and whispered to himself, do not believe your own legend. And that is where part 3 begins. Because legend, once born, demands to be tested. The tape did not stay in the warehouse. Bruce thought it would. He believed the moment would dissolve into memory like most private challenges do, discussed quietly among men who were there and exaggerated slightly over time, but never broadcast, never mythologized. He underestimated one thing. Curiosity spreads faster than discipline. 3 weeks later, a small martial arts school in Oakland played a copied version of that footage on a projector against a white wall that wasn't meant to carry history. The image flickered. Grainy, muted, but clear enough. Smaller man dismantling larger ones with calm precision. A moment where chaos failed. A moment where randomness collapsed. A moment where a spinning backfist nearly landed. That detail stayed in the footage. And that detail mattered, because it made the legend believable. But what the footage didn't show was what happened after the warehouse. Because legend is tested not in rooms full of witnesses, but alone. 2 nights after the tape began circulating quietly through circles Bruce never intended to impress, he received a message. No signature, no threats, just an address. And a time. Midnight. Los Angeles. An abandoned aircraft hangar near the coast. No crowd. No camera. No spectators. Just 2 words at the bottom. Let's see. He stared at the paper for a long time. Not angry. Not excited. Still, because here's the truth most people never understand about warriors. They don't fear being beaten. They fear being exposed. Exposed as slower than expected. Exposed as human. Exposed as flawed. And this invitation wasn't about ego. It was about curiosity. Someone had watched the footage and seen something different. Not dominance. Not speed. But the near miss. The spinning backfist that brushed air too close to his temple. Someone had paused the tape there and asked themselves a dangerous question. What if? Midnight came colder than usual. The ocean air slipped through broken steel panels of the hangar, carrying salt and silence. Bruce arrived alone. No dramatic entrance. No speech. The hangar lights flickered dimly overhead, creating shadows long enough to hide intentions. At the far end of the open floor stood one figure. Not tall. Not massive. Average. That was unsettling. Because unpredictability doesn't need size. The figure stepped forward slowly. No bow. No introduction. Just observation. You looked calm on film, the stranger said quietly. Bruce tilted his head slightly. I was. The stranger nodded. Good. And that was it. No signal. No countdown. The stranger moved. But not explosively. Not aggressively. Smooth. Too smooth. Bruce stepped laterally. Measured distance. Testing rhythm. The stranger did not throw a punch. He walked in. Close enough to threaten. Then stepped out again. Psychological pressure. Then a sudden low sweep attempt. Bruce hopped back cleanly. Countered with a quick side kick toward the midsection. The stranger absorbed it partially and rolled with it. Minimal reaction. That was new. No flinch. No visible pain. Bruce narrowed his eyes slightly. This wasn't about power. It was about endurance. The stranger circled. Slow, controlled breathing. No wasted energy. Then suddenly, a headbutt attempt. Close range. Unexpected. Bruce slipped to the side. Countered with an elbow that grazed shoulder instead of jaw. Slight miscalculation. Small, but real. And here is where tension deepens. The stranger smiled. Not mockingly. Appreciatively. You're not untouchable, he said calmly. Bruce exhaled slowly. No one is. Another shift. The stranger attacked again, but differently now. No rhythm at all. Half-committed strikes mixed with full-speed bursts. Body shot disguised as feints. Foot stomps meant a disrupt stance. Not elegant. Not flashy. Effective. Bruce absorbed a glancing strike to the ribs again. Not damaging, but enough to remind him of the earlier warehouse moment. Anger flickered. Just a spark. And that spark is dangerous. The stranger saw it. And pressed. Rapid forward pressure. Shoulder drive. Inside fighting range. For a moment, Bruce was forced backward. 2 steps. 3. The metal wall of the hangar only 6 feet behind him now. The ocean whined louder. The space shrinking. And this was the most unbelievable moment. Not the dominance. Not the speed. But the pressure. Because for 3 full seconds, Bruce Lee was being overwhelmed. Not beaten, but forced to adapt under stress. And here is what changed everything. Instead of exploding outward with aggression, he did nothing. No strike. No counter. He stopped resisting. Completely. The stranger pushed forward expecting tension. Instead he met emptiness. Bruce pivoted with the forward pressure rather than against it. Redirected weight. Shifted angle. Suddenly, the stranger's momentum carried him past center line. Bruce stepped to the side in one clean glide. Placed a palm gently against the back of the stranger's neck. And guided him downward. Not violently, but decisively. The stranger hit the concrete on one knee. Breathing heavier now. Bruce stepped back. Did not strike. Did not follow up. Silence. Only wind. The stranger looked up slowly. Eyes different now. You removed yourself, he said quietly. Bruce nodded. When you push, he replied calmly, I don't need to meet you. The stranger stood. No anger. No embarrassment. Just clarity. You're not faster than me, he said. Bruce shook his head. No. You're earlier. That word hung in the cold air. Earlier. Not faster. Earlier in reading weight. Earlier in sensing intention. Earlier in abandoning ego. And that is what the camera never captured. Because cameras capture movement. They do not capture timing before movement. The stranger extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Firm. Respectful. You passed, the stranger said. Bruce raised an eyebrow slightly. Past what? The stranger smiled faintly. The moment. Then he walked away. No explanation. No name. Just disappearance into the night. Bruce stood alone in the hangar long after. Not celebrating. Thinking. Because the unbelievable moment wasn't stopping a punch. It wasn't dismantling a boxer. It wasn't redirecting chaos. It was this. Choosing calm when pressure peaked. Choosing softness when ego demanded explosion. Choosing clarity when anger invited blindness. He looked at his hands again. Same hands from the warehouse. Same hands from the footage. But tonight they had done something different. They had not proven dominance. They had proven control over self. And that is rarer. Weeks later, the footage from the warehouse circulated wider. Stories grew. People exaggerated. He never got touched. He was too fast to see. He was invincible. Bruce heard the rumors. He never corrected them publicly. But in private classes, he changed his teaching. He began emphasizing mistakes more than victories. He recreated the spinning backfist moment. He allowed students to land controlled strikes during drills. He showed them how he corrected, because he understood something powerful. If you believe your own legend, you stop evolving. And if this moment had not been filmed, people would have believed only half the truth. They would have believed in speed, not awareness. They would have believed in dominance, not discipline. They would have believed in invincibility, not growth. And growth is the only thing that keeps a warrior alive long after the fight ends. Years later, when someone asked him what his greatest strength was, he did not say speed. He did not say power. He did not say philosophy. He said something simpler. I recover faster than others accept reality. That was the unbelievable part. Not that he won, but that he adjusted before others finished reacting. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside that grainy warehouse tape. Not how to fight, not how to strike, but how to remain wide when pressure tries to narrow you. How to stay fluid when ego demands rigidity. How to be earlier instead of faster. And that is why, if this moment had not been filmed, no one would have believed it. Not because of the strikes, but because of the restraint. Not because of the dominance, but because of the humility. And humility is the most unbelievable skill of all.